Hi, Misha here, and don't click off yet. I know Star Trek videos, especially Discovery ones, aren't everyone's cup of tea, but this one might be a little different. I'm actually working on some videos for the Real World X-Plane series, X1, X3, so on. A couple of people asked me about them, and it's something I thought would be fun to do. But that's going to take a little more time because, well, real planes require actual, structure of a video. Tonight, I wanted to do something just for fun for me and hopefully for you. Let's talk about the Section 31, kind of the CIA or FSB or Stasi or any other number of things. The secret branch, kind of the Greys, not the aliens, but the Spanish. Anyway, of the Star Trek Universe Federation, although not necessarily of Starfleet. Section 31 first appeared in Deep Space Nine, a good series. Reappeared some in Enterprise, a decent series. Appeared in the movie Into Darkness, meh. And played a major part, especially in Season 2 of Discovery. And their ships have an interesting aesthetic. I'll give them credit. They do look definitively human, but also not Starfleet. And they have very much a aesthetic going on. Kind of black and blue. Really kind of hearkening to real-world spycraft like the SR-71, the U-2, and including using drones, like the Predator and more modern versions today. So, thought I would talk about these a bit. Eaglemoss has pretty much given us the entire fleet. We've got 6 members here. We started off with the so-called stealth ship and the little drone. Then we moved into the kind of the medium-sized cruisers, 2 and 4 nacelle versions. And then we have the big command ships, the large cruisers, complete with star drive sections and all that fun stuff. And they actually share a lot in common and really do form a cohesive fleet. The only problem is they're quite cool, but do they fit in to the 23rd century? Can we reconcile? Is it worth anything? I don't know. I'm just happy we did finish the collection. The first ones here were in the the Discovery collection, but they had to actually finish out in the Universe collection because the Discovery collection was brought to an end after 33 issues. Anyway, guys, as usual, I like to bring in real-world stuff, so if you would hang out with me, because it's just something I thought I would do for fun to try to relax this evening. So let's get into it. We begin with the first one we see in the show, known as the Section 31 stealth ship. It is stealthy. We don't really get a name or class name, just NCIA and some numbers. But even those don't seem consistent. Other ones we see with a different alphanumerical designation. This is classed as a destroyer or a science ship if we're being diplomatic. And it's designed, well, for reconnaissance missions and to be stealthy. Not only is it physically kind of a black, gray, and blue coloration, it has stealth mode, which is kind of a running silent mode. It's not cloak. It also has movable warp pylons and nacelles, and some other kind of interesting features. It's a pretty small vessel. In Universe and Discovery, it's listed at about 274 meters. Using my 2/3 rule, that gets us down to about, 184 meters, 182. That actually makes sense, considering a good chunk of that would be the nacelle sticking back. Either way, it's one of the smaller ships and seems to be relatively lightly crewed. but also pretty powerful for what it is. It seems to have some pretty good tractor beams and phasers, photons. This would seem to be the most numerous ship in the Section 31 fleet. Kind of espionage cruiser type. We have kind of an angular hull with a bulbous underneath, which actually is reminiscent of early Starfleet ships we'll talk about towards the end of the video. And then we have a unique nacelle design. And it's a good sized model, actually. And this was our first one we really got in the collection. So, good entry for Section 31. We don't really know much about them other than that, though. But we see this one probably the most numbers of ships. And the next one kind of makes me a liar in what I just said 3 seconds ago. This is the Section 31 drone, which came out in the collection a short time after the ship we just looked at. We see lots of these, dozens, even hundreds. But this is a drone. It is unmanned even before control takes over, and then everything's unmanned, unless you count corpsicles. And this actually makes sense for a clandestine operation. We have drones today, so why wouldn't they? It is very simple, kind of a chopped diamond shape, and very flat. I don't believe it could have ever been crewed. At most, maybe it could have had one person crammed in there, kind of like K'Ehleyr in Season 2 of Next Generation when she's in a probe. So I guess that's possible. And it seems to have at least 2 cannon here. Kind of reminds me of the Predator having 2 Hellfire missiles. So it actually makes sense that even before control, Section 31 would probably have use for such vessels. This is actually the most recent model I picked up because I don't normally go for small scale things. Well, technically large scale. But I just thought it was interesting and it kind of completes the fleet. Honestly, I wish it was done in more of the standard size. But that said, it's actually quite nice. I don't believe this would be warp capable. It has some pretty big impulse manifolds in the back. But it mostly seems to be a sensor package, some light weaponry, and engines. And probably some, I guess it's not radar, sensor-resistant hull. But quite a few ships carry these, which makes sense because the Section 31 ships seem to be very lightly crewed, heavily automated, which, yeah, considering what they're doing. This is, the top is plastic, the bottom is metal, so it actually has some pretty good weight to it, and it's actually a pretty decent size, like an outstretched palm of your hand, and it sits pretty low on the stand, but very tight. So these are the 2 kind of workaday vessels, one crewed by a few dozen, one uncrewed without warp. But now let's move on to the cruisers. This is one of the first of the cruisers we see up close in the show, and the smallest, classed as a medium cruiser. And it's either named Shiva or Shiva. So it's either named after the Jewish period of mourning, which is probably not likely, or the Hindu god, known for being the god of destruction because of quotes of Oppenheimer, but also of time and arts, and not always a bad thing. In fact, Shiva is part of the, not Trinity, but the Godhead in Hindu culture, so one of the most powerful and venerated deities. Of course, we all know it's actually named after the League. And in universe, this definitely has telltale signs of taking after another ship, We have a roll bar with presumably a weapons pod, although it could be a sensor pod. We have the same style of nacelles as on the NCIA type. But this is a larger vessel. In universe, it's said to be 645 meters. So using my calculation, about 430, which is still quite massive, but more reasonable. So getting in there about like the Excelsior in size. So it uses the same components, even the same kind of basic hull shape on the bottom like the other one, but just larger. But I could almost excuse the size because I really think most of this is not regularly inhabited. This so-called saucer section has little tiles on it. Those are all bays for drones. Presumably they could carry other things. There's a section up front here, which could be for other purposes. But I really think most of this, and there's this gap in the middle, is kind of separated out for cargo, clandestine, that kind of stuff. So I would say the center section where the bridge is at, all that is probably where the crew is. We don't know the crew. We don't really see much about these, unfortunately. We do get one that's named. I think it's NI00047. Sorry, guys. It's funny, I've been talking, and only now does my voice start to do this. But it's basically upscaling, and again, takes after a very famous and beloved Federation ship, which we will compare to towards the end of this video. This is the first of our medium cruisers. Next, we move from Indian religion, mythology, culture to Chinese traditional. This is the Haiyi class, named after a legendary archer from antiquity. Depending on which source and cultural region you're from in China, he was either a mortal man, a demigod, half god, or a full god, or maybe he was a man turned into a god. Either way, he was known for shooting arrows real good. This is the same size lengthwise as the Shiva class, but because this is a 4 nacelle design instead of 2, it is technically taller and more massive, making it slightly bigger overall. And Star Trek has a long, proud tradition of 4 nacelle vessels, so nothing at all wrong with that. This too can launch drones, and at least a couple of these were at the final battle with Control at the end of Season 2. By that time, there were no humans on board. As you see, it sets pretty loose, but it also isn't just prone to flying off the stand, at least. So that's good. And has a really interesting front profile with the roll bar, small hole down here, and again this. We never really are told in universe why 4 nacelles are good or not as good as 2, why they kind of flip around. Of course, the real world explanation is it makes them identifiable on screen, but it's keeping on with kind of the tradition here we've established, and very much a fleet design. But these would be the medium-sized, medium-range cruisers that Section 31 would use. But they would need some larger kind of command ships, mobile intelligence gathering posts. So that gets us to our final 2. Moving on to the large or heavy cruisers, we have the Deimos class, or Deimos if you prefer. This is named after the Greek god of dread, terror, basically approbation suffered by soldiers before war. You know, that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. It's actually a good name for a ship of this type. And the god was actually the son of Ares, so that fits, Mars and Roman mythology. And in universe, this is said to be 872 meters. So adjusting down, that gets us to a somewhat more reasonable, about 580. So shorter than a galaxy, but longer than an Excelsior. And again, I can say that at least part of that is the saucer section, which is more of an unmanned or only sometimes manned part, more storage with most people in this. And then we do have a more substantial, more traditional looking star drive. In fact, this 2SL version certainly reminds us of a certain famous ship from the universe. Long, narrow, with a relatively large star drive. This would have been one of the command ships. At least a few of them were there at the final battle with Control. Not much to say. It has dark mode too, like I said, the others do. The nacelles can still move. They can turn off external light sources. Yada yada. Makes sense. And again, a very highly automated vessel, but not entirely automated, at least until Control decided, you know what, humans going around eating, breathing, pooping, sneezing, more trouble than they're worth. But this was the one that was in the Universe collection, so the last one they put out to finish out the series. Note that it does not have a roll bar like the previous two. That's an easy way to tell the large versions from the mediums. So let's get to our final one. And keeping on with the tradition, we have kind of the same parts recombined, and now having a 4NASL version. This technically is the most massive. This is known as the Nimrod class, which is named after a character from the Bible, so Jewish and of course Christian tradition, said to be the grandson or great-grandson of Noah, one of the kings in the Sumerian area, and some tradition even credits him with founding of the Tower of Babel. He was immortal, but said to be an excellent hunter, so on and so forth. And as far as we know, historically speaking, there's no evidence he lived. So all four of these are named from pre-Christian mythical gods, figures, or people. And one of these, NI-0064, was the command ship at the battle with Control. It was one that Leland was on board, the only human corpse-sicle still hanging about a bit. 2 or 3 of these were there, but this would probably seem to be the most specialized ship of the entire fleet. And it said that Control had, they said 30 ships were there, not counting the drones, of course, and that was nearly their entire fleet. So yeah, we can kind of assume their fleet was somewhere in the 30s, maybe up to 40. And this would seem to be the crown jewel, the most capable, the largest, the fanciest ship. And like the previous one, we have more of a true star drive and whatnot. Not much more to say about it because it kind of shares with the rest. So let's compare. You know, I was discussing with my wife just yesterday that it seems to be a very male trait to collect. Women definitely collect, but I don't know, there's something about collecting keepsakes and memorabilia and ships that, models, guns, what have you, that's very male. Women, when they collect, it seems to be more stuff that they can use, more practical. Maybe a purse, maybe shoes. Again, not saying this to be derogatory at all, absolutely not. My wife is actually a book collector, but there are also books she reads. So, I don't know, it's kind of a different mindset. My point was kind of at the beginning, what attracted me to the Section 31 fleet is that it is complete, and it is very cohesive as a fleet. And I don't even mind that they're basically old-fashioned kit bashes, even though they're done in the CGI era. At least they gave us, several designs. Better than having a copy-paste fleet. I mean, who would be silly enough to do that, right? And I like ending these discovery videos by comparing to more traditional ships that we know from Star Trek to see if we can kind of reconcile where they fit. And generally, I think we do. I didn't bring out anything for the drone, although I think the Academy Flyer would work well. Also, the Mars drone from Picard is based on this. But if you look at the Delta, the Warp Delta from Enterprise, the definitely resembles the destroyer, the stealth ship. And this is actually, we see an Enterprise evolved from the space shuttle in a lot of ways. Going from this to the Venture Star, up through the moon ship, I think they call it the Emmett class, yeah. You can see it evolve. So I think it's kind of neat that it is carried on, even with the way the angle of the nacelles is presented. Very much so. Of course, our medium cruisers, very, very reminiscent of the Miranda class. And I brought out the Lantry type as well. And I thought, you know, for a forged nacelle size, the Constellation kind of fits in. We don't have a star drive as such. Different thing, I know, it's based on the Constitution, but yeah, I don't know. Just thought I'd grab it. But very much inspired by the Miranda. But it has kind of a saucer, you could say, was inspired by the older Delta shape. I don't know. And of course, for the heavy cruisers, I see a lot of Excelsior in them. So, I brought out the Excelsior concept here, which actually I think fits very well, including the shape of its own kind of angular star drive and having 4. But of course, the more traditional Excelsior very much resembles the Deimos class. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out the Prometheus. This is very much like the Nimrod. 4 nacelles, very angular. Does have a secondary hull, but kind of blended in. Of course, you still get to the problem of technology. If they fit in, if they're too advanced. One proposition is that Section 30U1 used technology that was not to be integrated into Starfleet for another few generations, which is true to some extent. Concept and kind of black budget stuff often does have access to more experimental or even risky technologies. Of course, that's just kind of justification because of the fact that we're in the 21st century versus the 1960s or even the 1980s. In the end, I've made peace with it. And in the end, I enjoy these ships. The models are well made. A lot of their detailing isn't because of paint, it's because of physical features like the bumps and ridges on the saucers, so I can appreciate them. The nacelles have a lot of patterning. They're not the heaviest because of how thin they are. As with most Starfleet ships, the saucer is the predominantly metal part, with the nacelles being the polymer, the plastic. I don't know, just wanted to do a video on the Section 31. It's an interesting enough concept. It lets them do the dirty work, saving the Federation, the Starfleet's, purity. But I'm very glad they didn't do a Section 31 series. That seemed a little redundant. Things like that are good in small doses. Be like trying to do a Maquis series. No thanks. It's just, yeah. Once or twice a season works for me. But, glad Eaglemoss finally did the full set. So, let me know what you think. And I will get back with you for some actual real-world aircraft and tanks and ships very soon. As always, if you could, I do appreciate you sticking with me this long. If you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I will catch you, hopefully, very soon, next time.